it was at the height of my first year of stardom. Okay, Kotter stardom. So I hadn't done anything else that people knew.
Hey, remember me? No? Well, that's fine. It's healthy, honestly. Turns out when you disappear for a while, eventually somebody hands you a script about a guy who walks back into the exact room he swore he'd left. So you take the hint. Welcome back, Kotter. ABC put it on in September of 1975, and from the outside, it looked like the safest, most disposable idea in the building. Gabe Kotter returns to teach at the same Brooklyn high school that once wrote him off in the exact remedial classroom he used to sit in himself. Gabe Kaplan played Kotter, the one teacher who volunteered for the class everyone else avoided. John Travolta was Vinnie Barbarino, unofficial leader of the Sweathogs, a guy whose confidence outran his grades by about a decade. Marcia Strassman played Julie, holding down a marriage to a man who brought his entire homeroom home with him every night. Robert Hegyes, Lawrence Hilton-Jacobs, and Ron Palillo rounded out the Sweathogs as Epstein, Boom Boom, and Horshack, the three guys standing between Kotter and one quiet afternoon. Today, we're going into 15 weird facts. Now, I've had a lot of free time to prepare, so buckle up and stick around for number 1, where the show quietly promotes its own title character out of his own classroom. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Don't make Mr. Woodman write you up. All right, up your nose with a rubber hose, and let's get into it with number 15, 2 hamburgers, 1 lunch, and a lawsuit nobody saw coming. Alan Sachs caught Gabe Kaplan's stand-up at the Comedy Store, walked up afterward, and introduced himself. Just his name and Kaplan's. By Kaplan's count, it took 30 seconds, delivered in the slowest Brooklyn accent on record. Sachs was producing Chico and the Man. He'd come in that night with Freddie Prinze, and he wanted to talk about Kaplan's future in television. He said he'd called. Then he actually called. The next day. In that business, that's roughly a miracle. Lunch at Joe Allen's. Kaplan asked whether anybody had ever turned a stand-up act straight into a sitcom. Sachs couldn't name one, and the two of them started spitballing. First pitch. 5 guys who went to school together and never grew up, still acting 18 at 28. Then came the question of what held it together. An adult, maybe? A guidance counselor. The counselor turned into a teacher, and the teacher turned into a former student who'd been just as much of a screw-up as the kid sitting in front of him. 2 hamburgers, 1 lunch, and a show that would run 4 seasons and turn John Travolta into a movie star. Then the waiter sued for profit participation. The guy who brought the food, he'd been hovering over that table while 2 men invented a television series on it, and somewhere between the burgers and the check, he decided that made him a partner. Kaplan gives the whole thing 1 sentence in his own account, then mentions that when they sat down to revise the treatment, they did it with Alan, not the waiter. The waiter, he says, was getting difficult. Number 14, the man who named the Sweathogs owned 5% of them. Kaplan didn't come up with Sweathogs. Neither did Sachs. The word belongs to a writer from the Bronx whose previous major credit was a fake band. Peter Meyerson co-wrote the very first episode of The Monkees and stuck around for 8 of them, more than almost any other writer on the series, including the one where Mike Nesmith swaps places with Frank Zappa. So when ABC went looking for someone to turn the Kotter treatment into a real pilot script, they hired a man whose speciality was organized nonsense. He had a month. He came back with a script that sharpened the treatment, introduced all 4 guys in a way that actually landed, and gave them a name nobody had asked him for. Kaplan doesn't hedge on this at all. Meyerson came up with it, and that's the end of the discussion. Then he stayed. 24 episodes, plus a credit that reads developed for television by, which sounds like a formality and absolutely is not one. It was worth 5% of the show's profits, and years later, Peter Meyerson listed that 5% in an online auction. The man who named the Sweathogs put his piece of them up for sale on the internet. Number 13, John Travolta became a guest star on his own hit show. $2,000 an episode. That's what the most famous 24-year-old on the planet was making on the sitcom that built him. Picture it, fall of 1978. Grease had been in theaters about 3 months and was headed for the biggest box office of the year. Robert Stigwood had already locked Travolta into a 3-picture deal, and he was still reporting to Buchanan High to say up your nose with a rubber hose for $2,000 a pop. The contract was the problem. He'd signed a 5-year deal as an unknown stage actor, and unknown stage actor money does not survive Saturday Night Fever. So they reworked it. It wasn't a raise, it was an exit ramp. Fewer episodes, which meant more time for films, and a new credit at the top of the show. Special guest star, which is a polite way of saying visitor. Sources argue about exactly how many episodes he turned up for, and most land on 8. What nobody argues about is the shape of it. He's in the premiere. He's gone by the halfway mark, and the last stretch of the series runs without him entirely. His final scene as Barbarino is Vinnie working as a hospital orderly, stuck in a broken elevator with all 4 of the other Sweathogs and a woman about to give birth. It's loud, it's chaotic, and it ends with him kissing the nurse. Nobody in that episode knows it's a goodbye though. There's no send-off, no final beat, and no acknowledgement that the show's biggest star just walked out the door. Barbarino delivered a baby and never came back. Number 12, he found out he had the wrong part in an elevator. Robert Hegyes auditioned for Vinnie Barbarino. He read well, walked out certain the part was his, and nobody told him otherwise. Then he showed up for work. The way the story usually gets told is he stepped into an elevator with co-creator Alan Sachs and a guy he'd never seen before, and Sachs handled the introductions. Epstein, meet Barbarino. Hegyes corrected him. He was Barbarino. Sachs corrected him right back. He was Epstein. The stranger was Barbarino. Some of you clicked on this expecting somebody else's voice, and nobody corrected you either. The difference is I got my part back, baby. But that's besides the point. Anyway, what Hegyes did next tells you everything about him. There was no argument, no storming off the elevator, no phone call to an agent, just one question. Does Epstein get paid the same as Barbarino? He was told yes, and he said that was fine and went to work. He and the stranger stayed close for the rest of his life. Years later, Hegyes had a daughter named Cassie, and he asked the guy from the elevator to be her godfather. Number 11, 2 future angels, a silent film legend, and a future Starfleet officer. Gloria Swanson auditioned for Welcome Back, Kotter. That Gloria Swanson, and not on the way up. Sunset Boulevard came out in 1950. She was 76, 25 years past the most famous performance of her career, reading for a Brooklyn homeroom. She was up for the principal, originally written as a woman. Producers, however, flipped the gender and the part became Mr. Woodman. Farrah Fawcett read for Julie Kotter. So did Kate Jackson. Both about a year out from Charlie's Angels, both beaten by Marcia Strassman. Horshack's mother nearly went to Doris Roberts years before Everybody Loves Raymond made her a 5-time Emmy winner. James Komack lobbied for Ellen Travolta instead, John's older sister. So the woman playing Horshack's mom was related to the guy playing Barbarino. She'd later turn up as Fonzie's aunt on Happy Days because the 70s had roughly 11 working actors in total. But the best tape in the pile belongs to Jonathan Frakes. Years before he was Commander Riker, Frakes screen tested for Beau de la Barre, the transfer student they added in season 4. Black and white, feathered hair, swinging at a southern accent. He didn't get it, but the tape survived. Decades later, on the set of Strange New Worlds, Anson Mount queued it up mid-scene as an incoming message from the Federation and played it for the cast. Frakes never clocked the prank. He thanked him for the tribute. Number 10, the most famous Sweathog was invented in a meeting. Almost every Sweathog was a real kid with the serial numbers barely filed off. Kaplan had been doing them on stage for years in a routine called holes and mellow rolls. Freddie Boom Boom Washington came from a classmate called Freddie Ferdy Payton. Juan Epstein took part of his name from a kid known as Epstein the Animal. Arnold Horshack needed no work at all because that was a real kid's real name, and Vinnie Barbarino is 2 classmates welded together, Eddie LaCarrie and a kid named Ray Barbarino. In Travolta's March 1975 audition tape, he's still calling the character Eddie Barbarino. Both halves stuck together. Then there's the one who came from nowhere. Kaplan's treatment had 5 students, including a Puerto Rican kid and a Jewish kid written as 2 separate people. Michael Eisner had 1 note when ABC ordered the pilot. 5 is too many. Make one of them a Puerto Rican Jew. That's Kaplan's version. Peter Meyerson told the Wall Street Journal it was his idea. 2 men, 1 character, both certain, nobody's ever sorted it out. Either way, Juan Luis Pedro Filippo de Huevos Epstein exists because somebody wanted a shorter cast list. And the guy who played him was Robert Hegyes, from Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Hungarian father, Italian mother. He built the whole performance out of Chico Marx. Number 9, the feud was manufactured, the misery, however, wasn't. In 1978, Marcia Strassman sat down with People magazine and torched the whole thing. She was miserable. Kaplan ran hot and cold. He'd be your best friend one day, but silent the next, and she said flat out that open hostility would have been easier to handle than the guessing. She hated the series and prayed for cancellation. Some of it had nothing to do with him. Her 5-year contract locked her out of other work, she'd turned down 2 movies because of it, and she'd spent 18 months quietly trying to get released. For 3 years, her role had mostly consisted of asking her husband how his day went. When she came back to work after the story ran, the other guys formed a circle around her and joked that she should be wearing a bulletproof vest. Kaplan didn't say a word to her, not one. Then he read the interview and picked up the phone. That call is where it fell apart. The feud, not the friendship. Komack had been working both of them separately, telling each one that the other couldn't stand them. None of it was true, and Kaplan had been quietly pushing for more balance between the classroom and the apartment, which would have meant more screen time for the woman trying to get out of her contract. They still didn't speak for 15 years after the show ended. What fixed it was their kids landing at the same school. Kaplan was standing in the schoolyard one day when someone called out "Gabriel," and he knew the voice before he turned around. Number 8, the exec who hated the show. Kaplan never heard it directly. Sachs brought the verdict back from James Komack. This might be the worst idea for a show he'd ever come across. Then, Komack signed on as executive producer, directed the pilot himself, and ran the thing for 4 years. Enthusiasm can arrive late, apparently. He wasn't a network suit either. Komack had been a stand-up and an actor with 2 hits already behind him. He was one of them, which makes the first meeting even more strange. At his house in Beverly Hills, he spent most of it explaining that the ethnic mix of the cast was a problem. A distraction, he called it. These kids were basically our gang. Nobody would care. A few days later, just the 2 of them, he escalated. The network, he said, didn't want ethnic diversity on the show, which made no sense. ABC had already ordered the pilot, and Michael Eisner's one note had personally created a Puerto Rican Jew. Kaplan never did work out who Komack had supposedly talked to. He also briefly wanted Kaplan replaced as an actor on the show built out of Kaplan's own high school. Then they taped the pilot, and Komack came down hard on Travolta. Hard enough that Travolta was still describing it 50 years later, still not sure what he'd done wrong. Once the show was a hit, Komack left him alone. One exception. He wanted "I'm So Confused" cut, arguing it made the leader of the Sweathogs look weak. He never stopped objecting. It stayed in for 4 seasons anyway, though. Okay, we're gonna take a quick pause because if you've ever caught yourself blurting out "up your nose with a rubber hose" completely unprompted, you're among friends here, so drop your favorite sweat hog in the comments, and if you're into this, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps YouTube find more people who still remember what a mellow roll actually is. Alright, let's get back to Buchanan High with number 7. Boston was late to the party. The show premiered on ABC in September of 1975, and most of the country saw a goofy new teacher sitcom. Boston, however, saw absolutely nothing. WCVB-TV, the city's ABC affiliate, kept it off the schedule entirely. Boston was in the middle of a tense, court-ordered school desegregation fight, and station leadership decided a primetime comedy set in a cheerfully integrated Brooklyn classroom was the last thing the city needed that fall. The reason they gave publicly was different and even more strange. Variety reported the stated concern was that a cast of underachieving high schoolers might be a bad influence on local kids. Then the station's own spokesman insisted the show wasn't offensive in any way, while confirming it still wasn't airing. Kaplan called it the worst kind of censorship and said there was nothing controversial in it anywhere. Komack, who had called the whole show the worst idea he'd ever heard, took a different angle. Getting banned in Boston, he said, was funnier than anything they were actually putting on the air. He also claimed to have no idea why it happened. It didn't hold. Once the show was a national hit, WCVB quietly folded it into the schedule. Most accounts say by about the 5th episode, so roughly a month in. Lawrence Hilton-Jacobs put it best years later. The show was never arguing for integration, it just put a mixed classroom on screen and treated it as the most ordinary thing in the world. Number 6. One teacher created Gabe Kotter. James Buchanan High isn't real. New Utrecht High School in Bensonhurst absolutely is though, because it's Kaplan's actual alma mater, and its actual exterior is what you're looking at in the opening credits for 4 straight years. That building also turned out David Geffen, Buddy Hackett, Scott Baio, and 2/3 of the Three Stooges, Moe and Curly Howard. Same hallways. Kaplan's experience there was less decorated though. He's described how New York sorted kids in the 50s. Every grade split into 5 classes, ranked 1 through 5 by how smart the school figured you were. He was always in the 4s. His own summary were the 4s were the dumbest because the 5s were the criminals. He was also the star of the baseball team, which is the part that nobody actually remembers. The plan was the major leagues. The plan died at San Francisco Giants spring training, where he did not impress anyone and he came back east and took a job as a bellman at a resort hotel in Lakewood, New Jersey. Touring comedians worked that hotel. He watched them for a few months and decided he could do it. Then more than 10 years of clubs before Alan Sachs ever walked up to him. Underneath all of it, there was one teacher. By Kaplan's account, exactly one adult at New Utrecht thought he'd amount to anything. A remedial teacher whose faith in kids the system had already given up on became the entire emotional engine of Gabe Kotter. She never appeared on screen or ever got any credit, and in 50 years of this story being told, nobody has ever printed her name. Number 5, John Travolta almost no-showed the audition that made him famous. Casting director Lynn Stallmaster had already decided that a mostly unknown stage actor named John Travolta was Barbarino. Finding him was never the problem. Quick detour on Stallmaster, by the way. When Komack first mentioned that Lynn was handling casting, Kaplan heard it as Lynn Swan and asked if he meant the Steelers receiver. Komack said no, Stallmaster. No smile, no beat, nothing. Kaplan made himself a mental note to stop making sports jokes around this guy. The real problem was that Travolta had a Broadway offer with rehearsal starting soon and he needed the money. He was going to take it. So Stallmaster manufactured a reason to wait. He got Travolta a small part in a 1975 horror picture called The Devil's Reign. Not a career move, just enough of a paycheck to bridge the gap until Kotter auditions started. It worked. He stayed, he auditioned, and he got it. And then the last obstacle was his own mother. Helen Travolta was an acting teacher, and she'd watch enough careers get frozen solid by one early role. She didn't want audiences deciding her son actually talked like that and actually thought like that. Her reasoning was that nobody ever got famous playing a dumb kid from Brooklyn. He took it anyway, and within a year, he was a teen idol. Number 4, Groucho Marx couldn't finish his cameo. Kaplan worked a Groucho impression into nearly every episode of this show. Groucho was his hero, and the bit was something the audience came to expect. So the season 2 plan wrote itself. Kotter does the impression, and the real Groucho walks in to react to it. The episode was called Sadie Hawkins Day. The scene never got shot. Mark Evanier, a story editor on the show who's written about it since, says the booking didn't happen because everyone believed that Groucho was up for it. Aaron Fleming, his companion and manager, had been steering his public appearances for years, and she wanted a guest spot of her own on a future episode. That was the trade. Groucho at this point was 86 and had to be helped onto the set. The studio audience, waiting on the grease paint and the duck walk, didn't recognize him. He couldn't reliably deliver a line. The speaking part quietly became a silent walk-on, and then the silent walk-on got canceled too. What they did instead was sit him in Kotter's classroom chair for publicity photos with the cast, Travolta included. Those photos have never been released. He looked too frail to print. People cried, cast and audience both. Hegyes took it the hardest though, because he'd built Epstein on Chico Marx, Groucho's brother, and he said out loud that he didn't know how he was supposed to walk back out there and do that impression now. Groucho unfortunately died a few months later in August of 1977. Number 3, one impossible rhyme created a hit more than once. Nothing rhymes with Kotter. That nearly sank the entire theme song. The working title was just Kotter, and producer Alan Sachs wanted something loose and folky in the style of his favorite band, the Lovin' Spoonful. Turned out, his agent also repped that band's former frontman, John Sebastian. One phone call later, Sebastian had the gig and immediately hit a wall. By his own account, the only usable rhyme he could find was otter. Rather than build a chorus around a sea mammal, he ditched the surname entirely and wrote about the premise instead, a guy heading back to the neighborhood he thought he'd escaped. Producers liked it enough to rename the whole series after the song before a single episode aired. Then, it outperformed the show. Welcome Back hit #1 on the Hot 100, topped Adult Contemporary, and somehow limped onto the country chart at number 93, a 3-chart spread that basically never happens for a TV theme. And it wasn't finished. In 2004, the rapper Mace came out of a 5-year exit from music. He walked away from rap to preach and built his entire comeback single on Sebastian's hook. Same title, same melody, one extremely literal message. It went gold and peaked at 32 on the Hot 100 and hit number 8 on the rap charts. The video is stranger still. It's a shot-for-shot parody of the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood opening, with Mace in a red cardigan welcoming everyone to Mr. Betha's neighborhood. So Sebastian's song charted twice, 28 years apart, both times for a guy announcing he'd returned to a place he'd swore he'd left. He never did find a rhyme for Kotter, never needed one anyway. Number 2, the cleanest catchphrase of the 70s is a censored dirty joke. TV Guide once ranked "up your nose with a rubber hose" among the 20 greatest catchphrases in television history. 15th if we want to get specific. It's completely harmless, and kids said it on playgrounds for a decade. It's a sanded down version of something considerably filthier though. The real Arnold Horshack, the actual Brooklyn kid with the real name and no edits, had a go-to insult for when he wanted to rank on someone, and it was built around Mellow Rolls, a roll-shaped ice cream treat you could buy all over New York in the 50s. Kaplan's account of the original line is "up your hole with a mellow roll." Network Standards took one look and got to work. They kept the rhythm, kept the sing-song, and kept the rhyme. They replaced everything else that would have generated phone calls though. What came back was a rubber hose. Then the credit went sideways. The line came from the real Horshack, and Palillo's Horshack is not the one who made it famous. Travolta grabbed it, and Barbarino's delivery is the version lodged in your head 50 years later. Kaplan knew what he was sitting on. He cut a novelty single called "Up Your Nose" that scraped the Hot 100 in the low 90s, then licensed a board game with the full phrase printed on the box. And the commercial for that board game needed a stunt double for Travolta. They hired a kid named Steve Guttenberg, years before Police Academy. Number 1, the show promoted its own title character, Out of the Classroom. Read the title one more time. Welcome Back, Kotter. In the final season, Kotter is barely in the building. Kaplan's contract fight with Komack got bad enough that he left 2 episodes into season 4, and rather than rewrite every script around a missing lead, the producers rewrote the school. It starts with a retirement. Buchanan High's principal was a man named John Lazarus, and across 4 years on the air, he was never once shown on camera. Not a scene, not a line, not a glimpse. In season 4, they retired him anyway, because they needed to open up a position. Woodman moved up to principal. Kotter moved up to vice principal, which conveniently meant he no longer had a class. Julie became the school secretary. The action drifted out of the classroom and into the hallways, the schoolyard, and the waiting area outside the principal's office. When they did show a class, Woodman was usually the one teaching it. Kaplan had pitched something else. Graduate the Sweathogs, put Kotter at a junior college, and let the same 4 guys walk through the door on day 1. His argument was hard to beat. By that final season, Palillo was 29, Hegyes was 27, Hilton-Jacobs 25. There's Remedial, and then there's whatever that was. Producers weren't too scared it wouldn't work. Kaplan told them the whole thing was starting to look strange and that he couldn't be a major part of it anymore. So they added a Sweathog instead. Stephen Shortridge arrived as Beau de la Bear, smooth-talking Southern transfer student. The move a show makes when it's out of moves. He wasn't even the first one either. Angie Grabowski had been dropped in halfway through season 3 and quietly evaporated. Oh, and the other guy who screen tested for Beau, black and white, feathered hair, swinging at the accent, Jonathan Frakes, well, he got out clean. The writing staff got replaced too, with veterans of older and gentler comedy, and the show's rapid-fire teenage voice left with the people who'd been writing it. Kaplan was gone after 2 episodes. his name stayed at the top of the credits until June of 1979. And there you have it, 15 weird facts about Welcome Back, Kotter. Which one surprised you the most? Let us know in the comment section below, and to everyone who noticed the voice was gone and said something about it, I saw those. Every single one of them. Thank you. Subscribe and send this to the friend who still does the up your nose bit unprompted. Don't tell them what it used to mean though. Until next time, don't make us send you to Mr. Woodman's office. And this is home. I mean, remember when.